lie number 50, which is also connected with lie number 1 in my book, Killing JFK, is a great place to start because it's one of the most profound pieces of information that's come out in recent years, that there was a phone conversation between J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI at the time, and Lyndon Johnson. Well, 2 calls, really. One just hours after the incident, and then a follow-up call a few days later that basically was Hoover informing then President Johnson that there was an impersonator of Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico at the Soviet embassy. And that is pretty profound news for a guy that's supposed to be a nobody. Why would anybody be impersonating a nobody in the weeks leading up to the assassination? And rather than be amazed at that, Johnson just takes it in stride and moves on to the next topic like he was hearing a weather report.
Yeah, that's very profound, as you say. Now, what do you think was going on? Was Oswald obviously being set up as a patsy, as he even claimed, as he was being led down the Dallas Police Hall, or is he a lone gunman like some people still claim?
Well, I think that one fact, but there's 100 more like it, proves that he was being set up as a patsy, because who else would have any motivation to go to the trouble and expense and risk of impersonating him in Mexico at an embassy of all places? And of course it was the Soviet embassy. They were trying to set him up as a communist conspirator. Now, initially, I think the plot to kill Kennedy, they conspired, and they thought, the CIA and Johnson conspired and thought, if we can make it look like this communist sympathizer did it, then we can sort of blame Russia, and we get some double bang for our buck, because it'll be good public relations against Russia. But then at the last minute, they started contemplating that might be too risky, that if they stirred up any more trouble with Russia, Cold War and all that, they'd better stay away from that. And so they kind of flipped it in the end. Johnson began to use that as an excuse to keep things quiet. He said to Earl Warren, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who was appointed to the Warren Commission, he had the Warren Commission, he told him, look, we got to keep quiet that this guy Oswald might have had any communist ties, because it could start World War III. And that's how he kept Warren on board. But ironically, they had already set in motion that very thing, to try to implicate communism in with this plot. But in the end, they went with the lone nut. And that's worked for them for 50 years, for the most part.
Now, you mentioned LBJ already. I mean, how deep was his involvement with this whole thing?
Well, that's a point we could argue, and people do argue, and I, of course, don't claim that I know it all. As we like to say, I wasn't there. But here's what I do believe. He clearly knew about it in advance, because, as I also point out in the book, in the motorcade in Dealey Plaza, well, actually before they even approached Dealey Plaza, Lyndon Johnson, as the people around him notice him acting very strange, he's beginning to slide down in his seat in the open car. He pretends like he's listening to a radio in the middle of a political motorcade where he's supposed to be getting votes and waving at people and smiling. And instead he's playing with a radio between the seats and ducked down. And then as they turned onto Elm Street, right in front of the Texas School Book Depository, before any shots were fired, he is out of sight, or sliding out of sight, depending on which pictures you look at. He began sliding actually on the street before that on Houston, and as they turn on to Elm, he has gone completely out of sight in that car. And I challenge the listeners to show me a picture of Lyndon Johnson's face on Elm Street in front of the Texas School Book Depository. Of all the cameras and all the news people there is not, to my knowledge, a picture of Lyndon Johnson sitting upright in that car. But his wife, who's sitting right next to him, Lady Bird Johnson, is sitting up and smiling. She's oblivious. He's such a coward that he would hide but not warn her, hey, there's such many shots fired, you might want to get down. Yeah, I mean, that's there.
Stone there.
Yeah. So, look at the pictures, and it's amazing. You see Lady Bird in the car, and You see the Senator Yarborough sitting beside her on her left, but on her right, where Johnson's supposed to be seated in that famous Alkins photo where they're on Elm Street. AP photographer, Alkins took the picture. If you look way in the background, you can see their car. You take some magnifying glass, but if you look, you can plainly see Lady Bird, and there's a vacant seat beside her. It's well, not vacant, but he's ducked down below the sight lines of the camera.
And speaking on LBJ, I mean, with all the research and reading you've done, I mean, what do you think was his motivation to get in on this? Was it the war? Was it the presidency? What was his motivation?
Well, as many other writers have pointed out, it was a perfect storm, if you know that term, where bad things came together in such a perfect way that not only was there a great motivation or multiple motivations for Lyndon Johnson to want to get rid of Kennedy, there were also multiple motivations for other people as well. But to start, since you're asking about Johnson, to start with that, first of all, anybody who reads Johnson's biographies knows that he wanted to be president from the time he was a youngster. His grandfather predicted he would be a senator when he was like 10 years old, and he had a lifetime ambition. He was just eat up with ambition, as we say down here in the South, and he wanted to be president, and he had planned to be president until this young upstart Kennedy came along in the 1960 election and stole the Democratic primary away from Johnson. So Johnson, was already mad at Kennedy from the start, had to settle for second place on the ticket. And then I think what happened next is that some other parties came to Johnson, like Allen Dulles, who was head of the CIA until Kennedy fired him, and who said to him, and J. Edgar Hoover, who was also Johnson's dear friend and neighbor, said to him, look, here's a guy that's having affairs. He's left-leaning. He's too soft on communism. He's going to get us out of the Vietnam War instead of into it, and we've got all these defense contractors depending on this, all these multiple motivations. So all they really needed from Johnson was just, look, we just want to know that you're going to protect us and help cover this thing up when it happens. All you got to do is duck. Now all that I just said is speculative. I'm obviously not quoting anybody. That's speculation based on everything historical that I said about that is true. As far as we know that Kennedy fired Dulles. We know that Johnson was ambitious, etc.
Now we also do know that LBJ at the time had scandals that were brewing.
Yes.
So,
and I mentioned that in my book, as you may, I'm sure you remember. Yeah. That not only was it in his best interest to get rid of Kennedy, but it was also in Johnson's best interest to get the ultimate power of the presidency so that he could fight off these scandals. Once he became president, the Bobby Baker scandal just disappeared almost overnight. Well, Baker was still convicted, but Baker could no longer realize that he could no longer just sell Johnson out because Johnson had too much power. These scandals that would have been front page news suddenly ended up back on page 20 in the paper because for the next several months the Kennedy assassination was on the front page. So it benefited Johnson in so many ways.
And not only that, we also have recordings of Jackie Kennedy that came out years later. Her daughter, Caroline, came out with these tapes where she states she was afraid of LBJ. She thinks that LBJ was involved. Care to comment on that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because one of the things that amazes me is that to this day I've read in mainstream media pundits saying, well, even the Kennedy's family themselves do not believe in conspiracy. Well, that's not true. At the time, Robert Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy both publicly put on a face that they supported the Warren Commission report, that they believed in the lone gunman. They did that for a variety of reasons that, are kind of like a whole other story, but mostly to protect the family name and to protect themselves from the powers that be. It didn't work for Robert. He got killed, short time later. But anyway, at the time, they put on that face. But we have several things in the record that show they never believed it. As you just said, there's tapes where Jackie has plainly said that she believed that he was killed by conspiracy and that Johnson was involved. She didn't trust Johnson from the start, but as later years went by, she became even more convinced that he was part of the conspiracy. Robert Kennedy's son just a few months ago, RFK Jr. was in Dallas, of all places, giving a talk, and he said publicly that he knew his father believed there was a conspiracy. So it really is a lie that the media keeps promulgating that that the Kennedys didn't believe in conspiracy. They did. They just didn't want to admit to it publicly.
Well, yeah, they had their own scandals as well, infidelities in the family, that sort of thing. So that's
they had a lot to hide.
Yeah. Now, getting back to Oswald, because he's really, I think, and I think you do as well, he's really the central figure in all this. Obviously, JFK is as well, but if you disprove Oswald pulled the trigger that day, then there has to be something else involved. You have a guy with Oswald that is, at one moment, he's anti-Cuba. The next moment, he's pro-Cuba. You have him firing a simple shot at General Walker months before that he misses. But then you also have him up in the 6th floor at a moving target, hitting the target. So let's just get back to Oswald and how he's really this enigma. If we get to the bottom of Oswald, just your thoughts overall on Oswald.
That is a good word, and it's been used before for the whole case that it's an enigma, but Oswald in particular is. And there's two ways to explain that enigma. One is to say, as the mainstream lone gun people say, that he was just crazy. But when you look at the bigger picture and you look at all the different strange associations that Oswald had, including CIA and FBI associations, that doesn't remain satisfactory as an explanation for his actions, because why was he able to be connected with so many people within government, within the FBI and the CIA? And we know for a fact, we have a picture now of Oswald and this character named David Ferrie in New Orleans together. And we know that. It's not arguable. It's a picture, and it's finally been admitted to, even though it was denied for years. And we know for a fact that David Ferrie was a CIA contract agent. So we have him. If he's this crazy, why did he get to have these affiliations with people that in a lot of cases were people who were sort of certified by the government to be responsible people? But more than that, his action of changing like overnight from right wing to left wing, but then like say a week later changing back, that's not what crazy people do. Crazy people attach to one side or the other. Now over a period of maybe 10 years they might change their views, but he's flip-flopping back and forth. And that's obviously the work of a double agent, a guy who has been told by his handlers, today we want you to portray an anti-Castro right-winger, and tomorrow we want you to portray a pro-Castro, pro-communist. So when you look at the big picture, I think it's a lot more logical to say that Oswald was playing a part. Now, did he shoot? I think there's a possibility he did, but he may have been told any number of things. He may have been told, look, we want you to take a shot at the president, and of course you won't hit him, because there's some reasons we want to do this. We want to blame Russia, or we want to blame the Cubans, or we want to increase security. Any number of excuses they could have had to say, obviously we don't want to hurt the president. And they could have had him up there, and he could have taken a shot, and then suddenly, to his dismay, a grassy knoll shooter takes a fatal shot, or a Daltex building behind him takes another shot that hits Kennedy, because we know the first shot missed. And it makes a lot of sense to think that Oswald was put up there, told that this is for the good of the country, you're gonna fire this kind of warning shot at the president, you're going to not come even close to him, and this is going to help us in our battle against Russia. So he fires the one shot, and then all of a sudden these other shots start happening. He throws the gun down and runs downstairs instantly, where he meets this police officer. That all fits. That scenario fits.
As far as a handler, do you think it's Guy Bannister that was brought up in Jim Garrison's trial? Do you think that was the guy behind it? Or, I mean, there's so many connections, so many different ways.
Well, that's it. You can take your choice. There's a Russian character who I hate to mention because I can't pronounce his name, George D. Morenschild. who was Oswald's friend in Dallas that we know had CIA connections. That's a fact, and he traveled the world. He could have been a handler. Then, as you said, Guy Bannister was in Naval Intelligence and the FBI, and we know for a fact that he and Oswald were associated. And then David Ferry, who was a CIA contract agent. Even later, we found out that Clay Shaw was a CIA contract agent. So there are these people, and there are others we may not have known about. So who his handlers were, any of the above, or maybe others.
Now, just as mysterious, I think, is Jack Ruby. You have,
yes.
Initially he is saying that he was just saving Jackie from a trial. Then years later, he's saying, I want to come back to Washington, and I want to, I want to go back to Washington and talk to the Warren Commission. So,
well, he goes further than that. Jack Ruby even said later that this thing goes all the way up to the highest levels of government, and a reporter, and this is you can see this on YouTube. I'm not, obviously making this up. There's a video of Jack Ruby on YouTube where a reporter questions him and basically, I'm going to paraphrase, but basically says, are you talking about as high as the president? And he says, yes. So the president at that point was, of course, Johnson. So we have Jack Ruby, like you say, one day saying one thing, and then sometime later saying rather explicitly that there is a conspiracy that leads all the way up to the President of the United States. And so how do the lone gunman crowd answer that? They used the same bag of tricks they used with Oswald. He was crazy. I've been around crazy people, and these are not people that are functioning, if I can say this kind of funny oxymoron, like normal crazy people function. Jack Ruby was able to run a successful business. Oswald was able to be smart enough to figure out how to defect to Russia and get back to the U.S., which is no small feat. And both of these guys may have been eccentric, but they do a lot of things that show they had intelligence and abilities. And so to call them crazy, is a stretch to start with. But when you start tying in with all the other evidence, that's when you really start to say Jack Ruby is such an obvious hitman, a silencer, a guy who needed to shut Lee Harvey Oswald up. And in fact, I think Ruby was supposed to do it that first night at the police station, the Dallas police station, when the police were first showing Oswald to the press. Ruby was standing there in the room with a handgun, and he was there to kill him that night. I think he just didn't have enough nerve. Yeah. The irony is Gerald Posner and Vincent Bugliosi and some of my opponents try to say that just shows that this is random because he just always carried a gun. You got a guy standing in the police station with a gun within a few feet of Oswald within hours of the of the arrest, and that's just such an obvious plan to silence Oswald. But I think Ruby just didn't get the nerve up because, after all, that's a hard thing to do. And you're in a police station and kill somebody, you're going to get arrested. I don't know what kind of leverage they had on Ruby. I think it was more than just bribing him with money to do it, but it's not the first time that there are forces who have been able to silence somebody.
And going back to Oswald for a second, so we're implying that, excuse me, sir, you're implying that he knew that he was there, he was set there for a specific instruction that day, or do you think he didn't know until the moment it happened what exactly he was set up for?
I'm saying I think it was kind of in between, and this is purely speculation here. Well, I shouldn't say pure speculation. It's based on some of the facts, but it seems to me illogical to think that Oswald was oblivious, because if you were plotting this, if you and I were plotting this, and we had this guy Oswald who'd been to Russia, and we said, hey, he's a perfect patsy, and we got the motorcade coming by his workplace, it's so perfect, so wonderful, but what if Oswald got the flu that morning, or what if he woke up and just didn't feel like going to work that day? It would screw our whole plot up. So they had to tell Oswald something. They had to tell him, we need you there to do this. and to act like he's shooting, or if nothing else, just to be there for some purpose. So the handlers had to have told Oswald something. So I think he knew something was going on, but I don't think for a minute that he thought he would be accused of shooting the president. I just don't believe that. He was, when you watch his the way he talks and acts in the police station, he looks like a man who is he's like churning internally, trying to sort this out. Why am I here? Something's gone wrong. When is the FBI or the CIA going to come in here and tell these police that I'm innocent? And then he starts to realize, wait a second, maybe they're not going to tell him. Maybe I'm a patsy, because he was a pretty smart fellow. He wasn't well schooled, but he was a pretty smart fellow.
I think that's another amazing thing when you talk about Oswald is the actions of his timeline. You have him go in one direction. He's given up a cab for an elderly lady. So there's just so much confusing things. And then what I want to get into is J.D. Tippit. In your book, you have some very fascinating arguments that J.D. Tippit himself may have been involved and may have been yet another fall guy in this whole thing. Well,
that's probably the point at which I want to be the most careful, because, as I say in the book, I have nothing but utmost respect for police officers who risk their lives. And if Tippit was risking his life to stop the assailant of the president and got killed in the process, then he deserves nothing but our praise and a hero's burial as he did receive. So I don't want to go too far with that, but I want to say that it's not beyond the realm that there were people, I'd say in general, that there were people in the Dallas Police Department who may have been not in on the complete conspiracy, but who may have been handled themselves and told to do certain things at certain times. But yeah, the bottom line is, if I were plotting this and I were trying to set Oswald up as a patsy, I would never want him arrested where he might start blabbing. I would want him shot while, quote, resisting arrest. And if that were the scenario that some people might want to suggest, I'm not going to argue with it. I don't want to be the one to propose it because I don't want to defame Officer Tippit. But I can see a scenario where you send officers out to arrest Oswald and then have him get shot in the process. Now, in the movie theater, when he finally was arrested, there were too many people around for them to do that. They had a fight, and the lights were on in the theater, and there were spectators there. So I think ideally they would have liked to have shot him on the spot. That failed. Whether that failed because he shot Tippit or because somebody else shot Tippit because Tippit refused to shoot Oswald, there's any number of scenarios there that we just don't know. Once Oswald was shot, we lost the truth to some of the story, so we don't know all the absolute facts.
Well, let's go back to the arrest of Oswald. He's in the theater. At this point, he knows that something's happening. He knows that he may be the fall guy at this point. So you have him in there. I think a very telling thing is it's all over now. He doesn't say, yeah, I'm the guy who shot the president, pull out a gun and start shooting up the theater. He says it's all over now, or they're going to know who I am, something to that effect.
Yeah. Hell, actually, they're going to know who I am comment came later in the police station, but it's sort of along the same vein, and that is that we believe that Oswald, his whole young life, wanted to be a double agent in the FBI or the CIA, just as this TV show that he watched when he was a kid about a double agent. That was his aspiration, and his handlers realized that, and they were playing along with that and telling him he was going to be an agent. In fact, had already sent him to Russia as a CIA undercover agent. So to be a double agent, to be an undercover agent, you have to be anonymous. Once it sank in on Oswald sitting in the police station, they just put me in front of the cameras. Sheriff Craig came in and identified him as someone he'd seen, at the scene near the book depository. Then Oswald says that now they'll know who I am. But he said it. Sheriff Craig says that Oswald said that like a man who was kind of sad rather than excited. In other words, the contrary scenario that the Warren Commission tries to paint is that Oswald was this celebrity seeker who wanted, delusional, who wanted to become famous, actually infamous for a crime. But what he said was the exact opposite of that. Was, in essence, I don't want them to know who I am. I didn't want this to happen. It's all over now. My career is over, is what I think he was saying.
I think another thing that's kind of lost in all the conspiracy talk, just everything, is that our president was shot and killed in broad daylight. And whatever the case is, you had kids that grew up without a father, you had a widow. It's just such a sad story. Do you think that has something to do with why people are so attached to this and trying to get to the truth? Is it because he was really the last president that was beloved by all?
Well, I think obviously it was a grand tragedy, and that's why it still captures the imagination of the American public and the media. But I think there would have been more investigations than there were, and there were quite a lot. I mean, the Warren Commission was a very thorough investigation. It's just that it was controlled at the highest level, so that the results of it were misinterpreted and buried and reinterpreted and hidden. But that and the House investigation and other investigations were there. But I think in the end there would have been greater investigation if people had the kind of cynicism, or that maybe a healthy cynicism that we have today. This was all pre-Watergate. But after Watergate, we find out, oh gosh, presidents will lie. Presidents will use the press and manipulate the press. They will use the FBI to bug people that are their political opponents. And once the Watergate tapes came out, I think people began to really look at things differently. And then it wasn't long after that when the Zapruder film came out, and the American public really woke up. But there was always at least a good third of the public who smelled something rotten in Denmark from the start. I mean, very early on, there were a lot of people who said this isn't right. Something's wrong here. Beginning with Mark Lane and Mary Farrell and others, but it's certainly on one hand an incredible story of human drama and tragedy that grabs people's imagination. The romance of Camelot and the charismatic Kennedys and all that. But at another level, it comes down to politics and the kind of cloak and dagger stuff that we have seen in politics throughout human history. I mean, you look back. There were kings who were killed by their own brothers so they could steal the throne. So why people think it's hard to believe that Lyndon Johnson would have tried to steal the throne when he didn't even like Kennedy, versus history where we see kings or kings to be kill their own brothers so they can be kings.
There's all these other theories about how many bullets, what the injury was, what the damage to the body was. You have so many people talking about the fact that the back of his head was blown out. Why is there reasonable doubt? Why are they able to cover that up?
Well, on one hand, I think the medical evidence, the testimony of the doctors of Parkland and the testimonies of the Secret Service agents who saw the wound on Kennedy versus the autopsy, I think that is the most damning indictment of the government, because, and we'll talk about that. But at the same time, it's a paradox. At the same time, that is a hurdle that a lot of people have trouble getting over, because they're kind of what I was just saying about people don't want to believe that King's brothers killed him. People don't want to believe that people in uniform, that people who are in the highest levels of government would cheat on an autopsy. And so it becomes very difficult for people to get over that hurdle to believe it. But two things I would say to that. One is the autopsy was done. It wasn't a complete fraud. It was just that it was done very, very poorly, very sloppily by a guy who had never done an autopsy on a gunshot victim in his life. Most important crime, shooting crime in American history, and they give it to an autopsist who has no experience, in essence, for that type of injury. And then number two, that because he is a Kennedy, because he is president, or was president, you got a legitimate thing to say, well, we don't want to release all these gory pictures to the press. If I'd been alive back then, I probably wouldn't argue with that. I would have said, yeah, we don't want that, in the National Enquirer. And, so it wasn't a hard thing to cover up aspects of the autopsy without having the autopsist in on the conspiracy per se. The biggest thing was to change some of they had to change some of the photos, and that was not as hard as it may seem.
Well, and there's even evidence that there was surgery done to the head. You have a Secret Service agent.
What?
Yeah.
FBI agent testified to that, yes.
Yeah, you have an FBI agent testifying to that. You have the fact that the body was loaded in an ornate casket. When it gets to Maryland, it's in a shipping casket.
Exactly, and there's a lot of testimony for that.
Yeah, just all these different stories, but I think one of the key things is the surgery on the head, it looks like. And if you look at the autopsy photos that are out, it's still there. There's a V section right by the hairline.
Right,
what do you think about that? Yeah.
The speculation is that there was a wound in the front, an exit wound. An entrance wound from the grassy knoll that kind of blew out the front. The bigger wound, of course, was in the back where it exited out. But nevertheless, the theory is that surgery to the head, kind of like the forehead, the parietal and forehead area, was done in order to change the look of the wound so it would not look like an entrance wound, and that's why the surgery was required. There's no other real explanation for why there was pre-autopsy surgery to the head, but that is in the FBI agent's notes, and that's never been refuted, and no one's ever explained that satisfactorily. But then on top of that, we have this picture of the back of Kennedy's head that, supposedly from the autopsy, it shows one tiny entrance hole about as big as your tip of your little finger. But otherwise, the back of his head looks like it just came out of the barber's chair. The hair is all neatly combed and neatly cut short. And yet, in other autopsy pictures, his hair was really long. And, of course, we have this testimony from almost every doctor at Parkland saying that they saw, at least the ones that saw the back of his head, said it was a gaping rear occipital head wound. Occipital does mean rear. So, yeah, it's inconsistent stuff.
You look at the Spreaker film, and then you look at the pictures it released, you see all that blood and basically a mini explosion in the back of his head, and then you see, oh, look, everything looks nice and neat. No, sorry, it doesn't fly with me.
Yeah, it's quite a puzzle. But there's only one answer. There's only one answer in my book, and that is that they took a picture of the back of someone else's head, or they doctored that photo, just painted that photo up, which is not hard to do.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, let's talk about the grassy knoll, because for people that haven't been there, they can't really tell from pictures. You always say from the front, so maybe people are expecting something a little bit different. If you've seen the movie JFK, you know the line back and to the left, back and to the left.
Right.
So just explain for people who haven't been there, that don't know the layout, per se, of Dealey Plaza. It's not exactly coming from directly head on. That would be the triple overpass. Right, it's correct.
Area. It is an angle from the front. But it isn't perfect. And I've been there, and a lot of folks have. But anyway, you can see it in pictures without visiting. There was a stockade fence there. It was in the shadows of these trees and bushes, a great place to hide. And you can stand there today and look from the corner of that stockade fence to where the X is on the highway where the fatal shot is marked. And it's not exactly accurate, but it's pretty close. And it's a very short shot to the front. It would be the front right of Kennedy's right of his forehead, and where the bullet would enter. And it's exactly what we see in the Zapruder film. It looks like he's hit from the front. He jerks backwards and then away from the grassy knoll, that is to his left. Matter comes out the back of his head and hits the motorcycle policeman that is to Kennedy's far left and rear, which is in a perfect trajectory. If you draw a line from the grassy knoll stockade fence through Kennedy's forehead, out the back of his head, you take that line, it'll go right toward that motorcycle policeman, who said he was hit so hard by brain matter that he thought he had been shot himself. So yeah, the grassy knoll is an easy shot. I don't own a gun, but I believe I could have made that shot. It's that close.
Is the driver just slowing down because he's in on it with your research, or is he just slowing down to say hi to the crowd? How does that car slow down like that?
Well, first, good question. And first, let's say this: virtually every witness says the car slowed down. And for a long time, the lone gunman crowd, the other side of this argument, tried to poo-poo that and say, no, it didn't slow down. But everybody says it does. And then the funny thing is, a few years ago, Gerald Bain came out, who is a Secret Service agent, came out with this book defending the Secret Service agents. And he said in the book, well, yeah, he did slow down because when the driver heard the shot, he tapped the brakes to see if he had a flat. He thought he had a flat tire, and he tapped the brakes. Yeah, this is actually in that book. All right, and in fact, there is a picture that someone has put on the internet where they can show that one of the brake lights comes on in one of the photographs. So he did tap the brakes. Now, if he wants to stick with that story that that he heard a shot. He's driving the President of the United States. He's a trained Secret Service agent. He spent hours and hours trained as a driver, instructed that when you hear such a noise, you're supposed to accelerate, etc. He hears the shot. This is what transpires. He hears the shot. It's a shot that missed. He's slow to look around. Only after the second shot does he look behind at Kennedy, and only then turns back. In fact, some say he looked twice. Turns back, and he still doesn't accelerate. He still hits. That's when he hits the brakes. And only after the agent next to him in the other front seat says to him, "Let's get out of here," does he finally slam on the accelerator and start tearing out of there, which is almost simultaneous with the last shot. Now, is he innocent or just stupid or incompetent? I don't know. But my friend Vince Palomera is an expert on this, and he's written a book called Survivor's Guilt about the Secret Service. And he thinks the driver, he interviewed almost all of these Secret Service agents over the last 30 years, or corresponded with them, and he thinks that the driver, Greer, who is dead now, I believe, he believes his actions are very, very suspicious, as he puts it. But, it's another thing that it's really hard to want to indict somebody that might possibly be innocent, just someone incompetent. If I was in his shoes and a trauma happened, maybe I wouldn't react the way I would like to think I would. I'm hesitant to throw stones about people I don't have any documentation to prove that they are guilty. But I do know this: the Secret Service, as a whole, lied about the events of that day. And over time, because of more evidence being released, a lot of those lies have been revealed. So at the very least, they were guilty of trying to CYA, to try to protect themselves instead of speaking the truth. So they got to live with that.
We're, of course, discussing the book and some conspiracy theories with the author of the book, Killing JFK, 50 Years, 50 Lies, From the Warren Commission to Bill O'Reilly, A History of Deceit in the JFK Assassination. It is Dr. Lance Moore. You can find that on Amazon. You can get it on Kindle. Now, turning my discussion a little bit more into other people that have come out. Of course, you had Lane come out. He was really the first that came out very vocally, but the only person besides Lane, because Lane eventually did come out later with a trial. But initially, the first person in any type of power was Jim Garrison. What are your thoughts on Jim Garrison and his trial?
Well, yeah, you're right. That Garrison was one of the first government officials to raise questions about this. I mean, there were quite a few other authors and researchers and people who were asking questions. But a few years after the assassination, Garrison stumbled upon these New Orleans connections with Oswald. And I think that a lot of the things that Garrison said were absolutely true, and a lot of them have over the years have been proven to be true. So a lot of the bad press that Garrison received was unfair because he was right. Now, apparently, he did some things in the investigation. Even one of his own men didn't like some of the tactics and the way that he would coerce witnesses and stuff. because of that, he received a lot of bad press, and I don't know how much of it was justified bad press and how much of it was because of this conspiracy for silence. But I will say this. This is my last statement that I would make on Garrison. He was an extraordinarily brave man because he knew what it could do to, if he was wrong, what it could do to his reputation. He knew that early on in the investigation he began to see that there were witnesses who had been killed, and he knew that he was risking maybe his life in pursuing this thing, and he did it anyway. So he was a courageous man, and I'll leave it at that.
A side note about Garrison, though, in the Oliver Stone film, he actually played Earl Warren, and I believe Warren's family was not too happy about that.
Yeah, he played the cameo role of being Earl Warren in the movie JFK. That's correct.
Good.
What's really funny about that, they have Garrison as Warren, pretty much debunking Garrison's own theories. It's really brilliant. But getting back to witnesses, that's another aspect of this case that the debunkers have trouble debunking, because you have, first of all, at Dealey Plaza, I want to go this route with it. At Dealey Plaza, you have 51 people that say the shot came from the Grassy Knoll area. You have people running up there. You have Lee Bowers, for instance, who was the railroad worker that saw from the tower that there were two men standing there, and then he mysteriously dies. But primarily what I want to go into with this question is the Grassy Knoll. Obviously, you have 51 people that said, hey, there's something going on there.
I loved, and you can see this video on YouTube if you just search for it. I love that a lot of the footage in the moments after the shots shows the police and spectators rushing up the Grassy Knoll. Now, there were also people that rushed into the depository, because there's no doubt at least one shot came out of the depository, so there was noise there too. But all those folks rushing up the Grassy Knoll, they're not doing that for no reason. They're doing that because they heard a shot. In a few cases, some saw a shot or saw at least a puff of smoke from a gun. And what is the Warren Commission's answer to that? Echoes. Well, if you understand acoustics, you know that echoes come off a hard surface is much louder than they do off soft surfaces. Anybody can do that. And there is kind of beyond the knoll this triple overpass, which is a concrete structure and concrete tunnel. So there's going to be any good strong echo coming off of the, say, Oswald shot from the depository. I would have been thinking it came from the triple overpass and would have been running that direction, but that's not where people are running, and that's not what they said they heard. In fact, almost no one said they heard a shot from the triple underpass. The substantial number of people heard shot from the depository area, and a substantial number of people heard it from the Grassy Knoll, and that's not an area that's going to echo. It's a softwood fence. It's trees. It's grass. It's dirt. There's nothing in the Grassy Knoll that's going to cause a substantial echo like all these other concrete structures.
On the tree.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you got all these other concrete structures there. If there was going to be an echo, that's where you would have heard it. And the human ear can get disoriented about sounds, but not to that degree. They never did this. They never took real human beings and put them blindfolded in various spots in Dealey Plaza and fired shots from the knoll and fired shots from the depository at random and asked them to point to where they heard the shot. And the reason they never did that is because they were making the whole thing up about echoes. It's nonsense. Yeah, there's echoes, but you can tell the difference between a primary shot and its echo.
Lee Bowers and the Garrison case, if he were, and I'm asking specifically about the Garrison case, ignoring who was on trial exactly, but do you think the trial of Garrison would have gone differently if Bowers specifically and these other witnesses would have been alive?
Sure, and I think the trial would have gone better for Garrison if he had a little more money, a little more resources. There were several witnesses he tried to extradite from other states, and famously they claim, I honestly haven't researched this, but I've heard the claim that one was when Governor Ronald Reagan of California refused to extradite one of the witnesses. You can get crazy with this stuff, start blaming everybody for it. But the point is true that he could not get all the witnesses there that he wanted to for two reasons. One, he didn't have the money and the cooperation from other governments to do it, and two, he just had a little trouble getting people out of the grave to testify.
Hey, you alive down there? No. My other problem is if that trial would have gone a different way, do you think all these pictures, all these true documents would have already been released and we would know exactly what happened, or do you think we'd still be in the dark?
Yeah, I think Garrison could have quote cracked the case if he'd had those resources and a little more luck, but he with the political pressures that were put on him and the limits that he had, I think in the end he got impatient. Maybe that's a bad word to use because he probably had no choice. He had to move forward with it when he probably wasn't ready to. I think if he kept digging, the evidence is out there. Even though a lot of it's been hidden, a lot of it's been covered up, and a lot of it's been distorted, there's still a lot of good evidence out there. He did not, however, have all the evidence that we have today because he did not have the information from the CIA that we got from the Church Committee and the, what was that, 80s? I lose track of dates, but the congressional investigations found out the CIA had indeed been plotting to assassinate Castro, plotting to assassinate, and succeeded with assassinations of third world leaders. We began to learn that the CIA had done a lot of really wicked things, and so he didn't know that. I mean, he suspected it, but he had no proof of it like we have today. So we have a lot of proof now. He didn't have the White House tapes, the transcripts and tapes from Johnson and Hoover that we have now today. So I think he could have, with more resources, I think he could have cracked it. But when you're fighting the federal government, you're fighting the FBI and the CIA and the executive branch, which is what was happening for a long, long time. That's an impossible hill to climb, I guess.
Do you think Garrison was on the right track, even maybe Clay Shaw not being involved, but do you think he was on the right track of cracking the whole thing completely? Boom.
Yeah, I think he knew a lot. I don't think, again, like I said, I don't think he knew everything. I don't think he could know everything. But the fact that he figured out these connections between David Ferrie and Bannister with Oswald in New Orleans, and also with this whole Cuban connection, the Alpha 66 stuff, and Cubans that showed up later in Dallas as well. There's some threads there that when you start to pull on them, they start to unravel the tapestry of cover-up, and he was onto that. But again, I don't think he had all the pieces, but I think he could have. I think he could have started. Well, let's use that tapestry metaphor. When you pull on a thread and you start pulling on it, you don't have to pull it all the way because once you start pulling on it, eventually the whole thing begins to unravel on its own.
I think another fascinating aspect of your book was one of the lies. I forget the number, but one of the lies was that no one has come out on their deathbed with a confession. But quite the opposite is true because Hunt came out with a confession on the Jesse Ventura Show. It's on YouTube. People can find it. Now, people might go, well, who's Hunt? How's he connected? He was, of course, connected with LBJ. He was part of I wanted to say Watergate. So, what do you have to say about Hunt's confession?
There's no doubt that Howard Hunt was a CIA spy. I mean, there's no one going to argue that. There's no doubt that he was a convicted Watergate burglar, and that he was tangled up with Nixon and with high levels of the government. So we know that for a fact. So then when he's on his deathbed and has no real motivation left to keep a secret, he tells his son these secrets, and it was videotaped or audio taped, I forget which. It's very compelling. He has a very compelling story. He knew a lot of the facts, but even he may not have known all the facts because that's the way you run an operation like this. Apparently, is that you have deniability, you have compartmentalization, where Hunt may know this part of it, and somebody else may know the other part of it, and no one knows all of it. Again, I don't even think maybe Johnson knew all of it. So I'm digressing, but the point is, your original statement is one of my favorite things. that when people say, well, I don't believe there was a conspiracy because they couldn't have kept a secret that big, my favorite answer is, they didn't. They didn't keep it a secret, or we wouldn't be talking about it right now.
Right.
I wouldn't have written a book with 50 lies and 50 answers that's documented with real people who've made real confessions and real documents and things that have come out. They did not even really do a very good job of keeping it secret, but they wielded the power. And when you have the power to control things like autopsy photos, and you can lock up evidence. As the government has done, no argument there, they have locked it up. To this day, there's still a lot of documents locked up. Even the ones they've released, by the way, I saw somebody the other day said, well, the government's released like 90% of this stuff. If you look at the documents they've released, it looks like an exercise in using a black magic marker. I mean, they're just half the document be blacked out, and yet they call that release because they handed it to you.
Yeah. Now, what about Earl Warren? They asked him, do you think all these documents are going to come out, and what did he say?
Well, Warren understood the need to protect witnesses, and as a lawyer and all, you understand that there's some things that you like to, well, and as a government official, there are legitimate secrets. There's things that need to be kept secret, and I don't begrudge that. But I don't think Warren intended for it to be locked away for as long as it has been.
Yeah, but I think I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but he said something to the effect, not in your lifetime. A reporter asked him if we're going to see these documents, and he said, not in your lifetime.
Yeah, he did say that. But I don't think it was so much that he was necessarily actively a part of the conspiracy trying to cover it up, rather that he knew the law, and the law was that certain documents go into the archives. There was a kind of an automatic thing that came in place about how long they would be locked away. So I'm not gonna. He's another one I'm not gonna indict, because I think Johnson manipulated him to believe that he needed to cover this stuff up for the purposes of national security, to avoid World War III. But I don't think that Warren could bring himself to believe that there had been a coup d'etat, that there had been a conspiracy per se. So I don't know. I guess I'd give Warren a pass.
Well, what do you think is the biggest fault of the Warren Commission then? I mean, people have read it, and even what most people have read is the summary. There's 26 volumes of testimony and things of that. But what do you think is the biggest
the biggest fault with the Warren Commission is that they had some of their investigators were quite good and had asked good questions, and they kept good notes. They had quite good evidence, but their fault was that they just would come up with opposite conclusions. And if there was something that they couldn't prove one way or the other, a perfect example is, I think it's very easy to prove which bullet missed, the first bullet missed, but they knew that if they made a statement about that based on their evidence, they should have said, we know the first bullet missed, but that would have become problematic for a variety of reasons that we don't have time to go into. But anyway, so instead they just said, we couldn't determine which bullet missed, and it doesn't matter. Well, that's a lie. It does matter, and they could determine it. So they would take this evidence and they would say things around the evidence where it was pretty clever, where it would sound like they were acknowledging the evidence, but then they would move on. Just like with the doctor's testimony back at Parkland, doctors saying quite explicitly in the Warren Commission there was a gaping wound in the occipital region. That tells you right there that there's a grassy knoll shooter, but the Warren Commission never acknowledged that, and they just hoped so that the average citizen wouldn't know what occipital means. It means the rear of the head. And they got away with it, at least in the mainstream media.
Someone that identified Oswald as the shooter, he's down on street level looking up. It's a dirty window, and he can't. How could you go with that as a description?
Well, okay, there's another fault. You're answering your own question for me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Another fault. I appreciate that. Another fault of the Warren Commission was that they would pick and choose witnesses, obviously, to fit their preordained conclusion. If a witness could maybe possibly see Oswald, through the shadows from 6 floors down. Then he had great eyesight, and they focused on him in the summary. But if there's a witness, as there were, like Lee Powers and others, who saw men behind the fence or saw a puff of smoke behind the fence, they never mentioned that in the conclusion. So, yeah, very selective use of witnesses, very twisted interpretations of the evidence. They did a great job of putting together a lot of stuff, 26 volumes, as you said, of stuff, but then in the end just presented a big lie. It's a really complex case, but in the end, I think if people read my book, go through the 50 lies, if they want to throw out 10 of the lies and say I was wrong about them, they still got about 40 things that they got to explain before they're going to make me believe that there was a lone gunman.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Well,
I hope they'll buy the book. I hope your listeners will buy the book. If they want the quick way to find it, they go to Amazon and search for, just put Killing JFK in the search thing in Amazon, or they can go to Google and put JFK 50 Lies. You don't even have to put .com on it. Just JFK 50 Lies, and that'll bring up the website for it.
Okay, I do want to thank you for your time, Dr. Lance Moore, the author of Killing JFK 50 Years, 50 Lies. Again, thank you for your time. This was a wonderful look not only into the book, but also into some of this conspiracy. And again, thank you.
I appreciate you guys so much. So thanks for taking the time on this. We need more people in media who care about it.
All right. Thank you so much, sir.
All right, have a good one. We'll be in touch.